Kevin's kind of a unique guy. He can live in both the digital world and the analog world. And I found that he's not only got a high intellectual IQ, he has a very high social IQ too, which is makes him kind of unique when you find people in business. I've had the pleasure to serve in a nonprofit world with Kevin and find that he's a great guy to bounce ideas off of. Thinks in depth and understands what's going on. And then I've had the honor to watch him and his wife Kristen raise their two kids, Jonathan and Grace, and from little kids, little tiny kids, to actual real cool adults now. And so that's kind of a hard thing to do these days, but they've done a great job with that. Anyway, Kevin's going to talk to us about Built to Last, and I think he's going to apply some of his experience at Microsoft. So, Kevin, one of the most intelligent guys I've ever met, Kevin McQuistion.
But I do have some thoughts on this idea of Built to Last and whether or not Microsoft as a company is a place that is built to last. One of the things when you read the press, there are a lot of opinions. I did read some opinions coming into this talk, and it was interesting. There are two sides of the story. Some people believe, yes, Microsoft is built to last and has the ingredients and is in the midst of a reinvention that will ultimately be successful and position them for the next several decades. Then there are others who come in and say, actually, no, they don't really have a good and compelling vision, and therefore they will get lost and ultimately they will fail. And you get both, so you get both articles and they all have their data points, and I find that very interesting. So I'm going to share my perspective. I'm a little biased, so everybody has a bias. My bias is toward Microsoft being successful and being built to last, but it does depend on some things, and so I'll talk a little bit about that as I go through there. So Jim Collins wrote a book, Built to Last, and I looked at all the 18 companies he had in there, and then I looked at the 18 that he said were not built to last, and in each case they had common elements, and he picked out a few things. And so Microsoft was not in either list, which is probably easier for me. If it was in the second list, I might have had to do a little bit of defending. But so here's some thoughts on what came out of the book from me. You need to build your company around a core ideology. You probably heard this from the Paul Reed group last, they got together, they have an ideology of how they do things. I was looking through what Paul presented, and it was very beneficial to me to kind of think about how does a different kind of company think about what success looks like. And so Paul and Tema, you guys have been doing that for quite a while and thinking about that. Build a cult-like culture. Whatever cult-like means. Maybe cult's a dangerous word for some people, but then home grow your management, develop people up, make sure that they're able to do that. And those of you who've heard me talk before know I'm a big fan of mentoring and of making sure that we help people, at various points in their career to move toward their goals and where they want to get to. My job has been so busy recently, I've not had a lot of time for mentoring, so that's a consideration on what I do in the next few years, because I need to build time for that. It's important to me. I think it's a key part of every company. Stimulating progress through big, hairy, audacious goals, these BHAGs. Experimentation and continuous improvement. So we talked about the need to change. Some of you talked about that in your ideas of what Built to Last looked like. And then he calls it the genius of the idea of having both the core ideology and stimulating progress around that. So doing both. So both, this whole idea of both and. So that's like, if you didn't read the book, that's probably the main 4 things you need to know. I saved you some time. You can go back and read. He has some good examples in the book about this company did this. He talks about Apple and Disney and ones you would expect, and then some others you wouldn't expect. Like, oh, okay, I see. But common themes here. So Microsoft ideology, let's think about that for a second. Our mission when I first joined the company 21 years ago was PC on every desktop and in every home. So it was really around the device, around you being able to do more with the device you had. There was an idea of evolving that into the phone, and we tried that and we made some mistakes, and now we don't have really a phone business per se, but we are pivoting the idea of devices in different ways, and so this Surface brand for us has become a way to think about that. Now, that was a real change. Talk about a change. we were an OEM. We provided our software to everybody else. So it was about IBM, it was about HP, it was about Dell. So for us to go in and start to compete with these same people was a real risky thing we did as a company. And people don't really talk about kind of what happened there. From my perspective, again, this is not, I'm not sharing anything that's internal or a secret, but from my perspective, we needed to go create the first class experience to show the way to other people of what we wanted our software to be, which is why we created Surface in the first place. That's why we came up with that product. So once we created that product, then it became competitive, and then obviously there were a lot of meetings. I used to work with Dell and HP quite a bit, and they weren't always very friendly. Like we'd be sitting there going, like, why are you guys competing with us? Why are you doing this? And what we were saying to them is, unless we can show you what it's supposed to look like, we're not confident you're going to build the thing that we need to compete against Apple, against these upcoming phones. And so Surface as a concept was all about that, much like Xbox was. Same thing. To do entertainment right, you have to have a device. Well, that's all changing now. Now we're moving away from devices, and now we're moving this thing called the cloud. And I work in the cloud, and the cloud is my main area, keeps me quite busy. And cloud computing is not device-centric. So we moved out of a place where the device was at the center to now where the device is irrelevant. That's a little bit of a change, right? From device-centric to device-agnostic. We actually are no longer even software driven in a lot of ways, in the sense that software, whether or not you have a software on your device or whether you own software or have the intellectual property to that, we're not as concerned about policing that. We used to be all about privacy and protection and IP and all of that and trying to chase down the criminals. Now we really like whatever software you want to use. You can use open source, you can use Windows, you can use your Surface, you can use an HP, you can use a Dell, you can use a Samsung phone, whatever. We even like Apple now. And so that's a real change. And really all we're saying is on the back end of that, we will provide you the computing capability to do what you want to do on that device. So that's a real change from us trying to own the device to now kind of providing the back end to the device. That's real evolution of how that works. So now the mission, and this is our newer CEO, Satya Nadella. He's been there since 2012, 2013 was when the transition happened. And his vision is to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. And that's quite a different vision for a company, isn't it? Like if you read that without knowing who said it, who would you think was saying something like that? Any thoughts on who might say a statement like that other than, like, what does that sound like to you? Sounds like someone who works for, maybe the United Nations? Someone in some kind of global role of some kind, you know? Maybe some World Health Organization of some kind, right? I mean, that's what you see there. And what's interesting about that is that's really, I think it's really changed the way the company not only approaches the daily thing we're doing, but also the reason why. Why are we doing what we're doing? What is it about? Are we about trying to go win and get be number one in every industry, which was the old GE model? Remember the GE model? You had to be number one or number two in every one of the businesses you were in. And I believe that was a very compelling vision for GE and why GE was quite successful. But that really still, you win and other people lose in that context. So this one is not really about winning and losing. And what it's done, tone-wise, is where we used to sit down, and I've sat down with executives of a lot of different companies, and we would sit down and we would talk about our joint goals. And there were always conflicts, and then it became more of the art of the deal on who could get more out of the others. And everybody says win-win, but win-win is just another way to get what you want. And when you take that context. So what we moved to now is we sit down and have a discussion. It was like, well, let's talk about what you want to do. What is it you want to achieve? What are you trying to create for your company? How can we help you achieve that? How can we help you using this very compelling back-end cloud computing infrastructure we have to basically do more? because it's pretty amazing. And I don't know if I'm going to geek out for a sec for you. If you think about the cost of what it used to take to run a large server within an organization to provide computing to all your people. You had to have an IT staff, you had to have machines, you had to have electricity, you had to have all this in-house. If someone left your company, you were really in a bad position because like, oh no, how are we going to keep going? You remember those days. That was the way it really worked. For a lot of companies, especially small companies, that's not even possible to do that anymore. They can't run their own IT. And so the idea of being able to connect that in to a back-end cloud and do that, that's kind of an interesting idea. And that's why when we talk to them, it's like, well, think of what you could do. You could do massive mainframe computing. You can do big data calculations. You can use Power BI, which is a part of Excel that comes with Office that most people have, to go do amazing things just without paying extra money to anybody. All you have to do is have the time and the creativity to sit down and write an app in Power BI and allow yourself to kind of light that up. And anybody can do that. You can go watch a YouTube video and they'll show you how. Because that's the nice thing about YouTube videos. That's how I do anything at home, by the way. Because I'm good technologically, but anything I do at home, I do with a YouTube video. Or I call a friend who can be a YouTube video for me. So this is that's the ideology changing. I think this ideology is positioning us to last in a very different way. That's my main argument, by the way, for this. My other arguments are much weaker. So I'll just start with that. Here's kind of where, this is the culture. We did have definitely cult-like, fanatical culture. And I would say there's still a little bit of that going on. I would say probably not as much more recently in the sense that it's not so much about us and about who we are and what we do as it really is with this new vision about trying to connect into the community and do more with other people. So the culture, so I'm kind of disagreeing now a little bit with Jim on the idea that you have to have something so internally focused, but you do have to have some strong ideas that you hold together, and you can't really have too much change that comes in from outside that goes away from that core set of values and vision, that ideology, but it is still the ideology and it's the idea of the and that he talked about. So we used to have these things called stock options, and that was where people, they came for 5 to 7 years, they got rich, they retired, they're now in your community, they may do good or not do good. I hear stories about former Microsoft millionaires who do well and some who don't do well, and so that was kind of when. Then we went to stock awards. The stock awards were not escalating clauses, and they didn't come in larger amounts. It's just you just get an amount of money, and if you stay with the company a few years, you get more money, and it's really not something I sit there and think about. Once a year, I get my stock awards, and then, occasionally I'll sell them when I need some funding. But very different idea, right? Versus, I'm going to go use this to parlay into something versus having that. Used to be very much about us. How does Microsoft win? You heard the stories of some of the quotes from some of our leaders, from Bill and Steve, and it was very, very competitive, and it was really about winning and only about winning, and that wasn't always friendly. And so now we have these things, this idea of open source and Microsoft being about open source, and we're actually one of the really key members of the open source community. So that's quite a change for us to be out there talking to these people that we used to say were a cancer and they were evil and they were a threat to our Windows franchise. And now we're actually strong citizens, a part of that. We had this thing called stack ranking, where we actually went in and ranked people, and you either got top or you got bottom, and some people got in the middle. We now have, instead of having an annual performance review, we have, throughout the year, we have things called connects, where we connect in with our employees, and we just talk about what's going on, how's it going, what's going well, and then about once a year, we spend 10 minutes talking about, well, here's your rewards for the year, thank you for your performance and support, and let's go again next year. And so it's a real change from the old mentality culturally. So we're still in culture a little bit. Fixed mindset and growth mindset. We have this book that Satya brought to us very early on, and it is the language of the company now. And I think all companies have their own language and their acronyms, but you hear growth mindset more than anything now at Microsoft. Everything's about and a growth mindset, for those of you who don't know, that's the idea of being open and being learning, always learning. Help me learn, help me think more. Let's chew on this a little bit more versus, no, that's wrong, you're an idiot, it's the stupidest thing I ever heard, which are all things I have heard during my time at Microsoft from somebody. And so that's a real kind of different thing. And the idea of being open and respectful, some of the values that Steve Ballmer brought into our company are still there, but the idea now of like, let's do them in a different mission, which is empowering every person, every organization on the planet to achieve more. And then we moved from this licensing model where we used to license, everything was about the license. So for 40 years, we actually tried to get people to buy our software. And now we're only focused, our sales force this year for the first time is only focused on cloud consumption on the back end. All we care about is people using our data centers, and we have 20 some data centers on Azure, and we have over 30 on Office 365 around the world. They're all connected, and they're all kind of backed up and protected, and they're all very eco-friendly because that's what we do. And now it's really about how do we get those used. And the more they get used, the more we build. And so we just kind of keep growing and growing and growing. And so a little bit of the Amazon phenomenon that you've seen of how they've grown both in the cloud and also even in their retail business, we're seeing that same thing. It's more about the customer. It's about the consumption. It's not about locking people into owning a license with us. So those are the changes. What hasn't changed, we still have free soda. That's one of the most passionate discussions if you ever get into talking about taking away the free soda. And we now have all kinds of other drinks, fruit juices, filtered waters. We've got about and we have our Starbucks coffee machines and all that other stuff. So there's plenty of free stuff to keep people there. But then it's not so much also about being tethered to the building. So a little bit of a nuance is you have free soda when you're there, but you also have a lot of technology that allows you to work anywhere. And so I work from our home over near Chelan a lot because I just need to get away sometimes from the craziness and just go look at the Columbia River and just kind of sit there and recharge a little bit. But I can still then come back. I can kind of recover and work. We've always hired people or leaders who have a passion for technology. If you ever want to get a job interview at Microsoft, you need to show two things: that you can lead and that you know your tech, and they'll test you to find out, do you really understand whatever tech? You could say, I'm an expert on a fly fishing pole, and we would test you on how well you really knew it. And that would be our way of testing. Do you actually have a passion for it? Do you care about how it works? Do you understand how it works? That's really important to us as a company. This idea of democratization of IT, I think you've always seen this. We're always trying to take as much as possible and pack it in to whatever it is that we deliver. So whether that be Office or Windows or now Azure, that's about giving more and more and more and taking things that are out there. And that's when we buy companies like LinkedIn or others that we bought. The idea is just let's fold it in, and let's just make it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So we're a little bit of the Walmart of the technology. And that's very different than like an Oracle or an IBM, who are more about premium cost on the higher end. We're at the opposite end of that spectrum, and that's how we compete with them. We go in and say, let's do more with less, is really our goal. I think that the data has shown that it's the most charitable company on the planet. The billions of dollars that Microsoft people have given, it's a very generous group of people that I work with. They're generous with their money, they're generous with their time, they care about doing good, and I really admire that about people. We just spent a day at a school. We've spent days at all kinds of places as a company. We just go out and try and help as much as possible, and people are very involved in their community. So there's, if you meet Microsoft people, usually there's a strong charity element to what they value. And then homegrown management. We only have had 3 CEOs. Bill Gates and Paul Allen, but Bill was the CEO and Paul left, and then Steve, and then now Satya. So it's at three CEOs, and then a lot of our internal leaders are also internally grown. And Jim Collins makes the point in the book that companies who bring a lot of external people in are not built to last. Too much change, hard to follow the core ideology. So that's why I'm making the argument. This is my second best argument of why Microsoft is built to last. And then where do we go next? Satya just wrote a book. It just came out. I just got the employee's copy of it where he wrote a bunch of notes in it. It's kind of fun. Neat to see that. Just a couple of things on this book. This idea of refresh. Refresh is on your computer, it's function F5. If you've ever used the function key, it's actually possible. You can push function and then you hit those buttons at the top. If you do function and you hit F5 on a PC, it will do a refresh. It'll actually refresh whatever it is that whatever application you're a part of. Now, a refresh is not what you think though. It's not a wipeout. It doesn't wipe everything out. It actually keeps some things and replaces some others. So this state here on this side stays, but this stuff over here actually gets refreshed. And so there's this idea of static and dynamic content, and so refresh is just let's get the latest view of that. Funnily enough, cloud computing is a massive refresh. In fact, what we're able to do with this cloud, and it's hard to picture what a cloud does, but every time that my iPhone connects to Office 365 on the back end of the Microsoft Cloud, that thing that I'm requesting can be completely rewritten and resent to my phone within milliseconds. That's how much computing power is at the back end of that. It's a brand new representation. It's still a refresh in that it keeps components and refreshes others, but I am getting a new download of that content on a constant basis, which is why when you no longer have connection, what happens? You get nothing, right? You get the kind of no service thing, right? And that's why what we're trying to do is we're trying to make it so you can live in both worlds. You have an offline copy of the latest state, and then you have the ability to refresh to get the latest so you can continue to work when you're not connected, and then you can be in better shape, have the latest content when you are connected. That's the concept of this. That's this idea of refresh. So when he says, Satya says in his book, and I recommend it, it's a good read. When he says hit refresh, he's saying in effect that's how we need to approach not only our technology but our business problems, our communities. Sometimes we've got to go in and hit refresh on a community and say, let's keep this and let's go here. I actually am working right now with in a nonprofit context where I'm helping them do a hit refresh. And what I've said to them is, let's go back and look at what you were created for. What was your vision when you first started? What of that do you actually want to keep? Okay. Now, what do you want that's new? What's the you feel like you need some change. So how do we do both at the same time? How do we keep the good that we wanted, keep that core ideology, as Jim Collins would call it, and then how do we refresh the things so that we're relevant, we're ready for the new context. So that's that idea. And so he has this nice subtitle, The Quest to Rediscover Microsoft's Soul. I noticed the word soul. I think that's an interesting one. And imagine a better future for everyone. He genuinely, passionately believes this. And it's very inspiring to spend time with him and to connect on this topic. And I always walk out thinking, wow, okay, that's great. I need to go rethink how do I get to the heart of this. So Satya has done a great job of resetting the tone of the company and challenging all of us to go do some good and to make sure that we help these people and these organizations to achieve more. Key idea of the book is people, organizations, societies can and must transform, hit refresh, in their persistent quest, sorry about that, not quiest, persistent quest for new energy, new ideas, relevance, and renewal. So the idea of this kind of ongoing renewal. And then some of the key bets that we're making, I mentioned cloud computing. We have this idea in the developer community of hack fests. This is where instead of you sitting there and trying to develop something perfect and design it perfectly, you just get together and you hack on it. And then ideas come out and you continue to improve and continue to improve. And this is a very open source idea that we've embraced. And so the idea of just kind of ongoing hacking. And people or developers love this. So you get developers together and you hack together and it's a lot of fun. And young people, millennials in particular, are very, very fond of this idea. And then we do still have our Surface brand, which is still important to us. It's important to have a compelling experience for people as a part of the PC. Windows 10 is at the center of that. We want to have that same Windows 10 experience not just on Surface but on other devices. So we're still friendly with the HPs and the Dells and the Lenovo's, and I think we've come to a place now where instead of having this kind of bickering, it's more like, hey, how do we help you do more? And then how do you connect that into our cloud computing back end to do more. And so that it's changed the tone of that conversation from just a licensing discussion to now being more about them doing more as well. It's hard though, I will say, for some of those companies. It's hard for, pick any one of those large companies. It's hard for them to think about the potential loss. What happens if people don't buy my devices? What happens if they don't continue to pay me for those things? Can I trust Microsoft? Can I trust this cloud thing? It's hard for them to hit refresh in all of this, and so that's been interesting as we've gone through that discussion. But we have a really good tone to that. I want to give you another example, kind of in closing, of another built to last organization, lasting a little bit longer than a few decades. If you go back, and this is funny, when you look at when you read the Bible, there's a lot of different versions of the Bible, and I like to read different ones every year. And I usually read through the Bible every year. Every day I read a different kind of section, different portion. And last year I read through the Message. It was one of my favorite refresh experiences. If you haven't read all the way through the Message, it's well worth reading. Very, very interesting. Despite any philosophy you may have of whether or not it's truly a translation or whether it's a paraphrase or whatever you think about all of that, I find it very refreshing. There's this really important thing that's a part of this. So let's read this one you'll know this passage. This is the one about he calls it the carpenter, but the builder. These words I speak to you are not mere additions to your life, homeowner improvements to your standard of living. They're foundation words to build a life on. If you work the words into your life, you're like a smart carpenter who dug deep and laid the foundation of his house on bedrock. When the river burst its banks and crashed against the house, nothing could shake it. It was built to last. But if you just use my words in Bible studies and don't work them into your life, you're like a dumb carpenter who built a house but skipped the foundation. When the swollen river came crashing in, it collapsed like a house of cards. It was a total loss. Isn't that an interesting version of that passage, which I've read for my whole life? But I love that it built to last. It was right there. I was like, I didn't even plan it, but I went in and pulled it out and went, oh, that's perfect. But the idea of built to last, if you think about it, the idea of the organization that Jesus started that was built to last was actually, instead of it being about a synagogue or a house of worship, it became, the people themselves became the church. And so those of us who are part of the faith community, we are the church. It is not a building. We talk about this at our church quite a bit. It's not about our place that we come to. It's about us going and being the presence of God in our workplace. And so that's what that's about. And then the other one, the other interesting thing is, Jesus was asking Simon about who he was, and Jesus said, "You're the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God." He said, "God bless you, Simon, son of Jonah. You didn't get that answer out of books or from teachers. My Father in heaven, God himself, let you in on the secret of who I really am. And I'm going to tell you who you really are. You are Peter, a rock. This is the rock on which I put together my church, a church so expansive with energy that not even the gates of hell will be able to keep out." Again, the idea, this is not about my church, the Catholic Church, my church, Peter's church, because I've been to I've been to all the different Catholic churches, and it's not about Peter's foot or Peter or anything about that. It's about a change where the church went into people. Emmanuel, God with us, instead of God being within a house. And so that to me is a even better example built to last. I shared my Microsoft example to you, but to me that's a truly transformational. I think that empowers me and my organizations to achieve more. So I think it goes along with Microsoft's vision quite nicely. But I actually think that there's some things here for us to kind of think about as far as how do we go out and make sure that when we are in our communities, in our homes, in our families, that we are truly seeking to make a difference for people, which I think we all want to do, and that we're also making sure that we don't burn ourselves out going after things which are not actually going to last. And I think that's a very important concept. The older we get, the more I realize it's not about my money, it's not about my things. It's really about being plugged into a greater mission, which I believe is even more compelling than any of the organizational missions that I've been a part of. So that's my thoughts for the group. Thanks for having me. Yeah.